Hey guys, the time has arrived that so many of us have been waiting for. The trial is getting underway against Leticia Stauch, accused of killing her stepson, 11-year-old Gannon Stauch. Now, I'm not going to go over the case very much or, not even close to in its entirety because it is a huge case. And I have made a video about it before, but of course, this case was ever changing. So a lot happened since the time that I made that initial video. But I kind of want to talk about what is happening now that the trial is getting underway and what we should expect going forward. So for anybody that does need a really quick recap, I'm sure most of you don't, Leticia is accused of killing her stepson Gannon on or about January 27th of 2020. At the time, she was caring for Gannon and his little sister, both her stepchildren, while her husband, their biological father, was out of town. At that time, she stated that Gannon had stayed home from school because he was having stomach issues that he'd been having all night. And she texted that to the father and also called the school to let them know that Gannon would not be in. And that day, she took Gannon with her while she ran some errands and then stated later that he was feeling better and wanted to go to a friend's house around 3 o'clock and that she gave him permission to go. She said that he was expected home around 6 o'clock but failed to return home. She reported him missing that evening. And when the police initially went out and spoke to her, had a quick look around, they decided to go ahead and list him as a possible runaway, which was kind of odd because Gannon didn't have any history of getting in trouble, running away. He seemed to be fine at school. It was a little odd to me that he was listed as a runaway. So I don't know if maybe Leticia kind of nudged them in that direction or gave them the feeling that that's what she thought happened. But at any rate, it wouldn't be long before speculation would turn to the stepmother. And I'll tell you this, she had no chance in hell of getting away with this crime because she really sabotaged herself. She was very vocal on Facebook, constantly, defending herself against online sleuths or people in the community that may be starting to ask questions. And she constantly was attacking Landon Hoyt, the biological mother of Gannon, on social media. She was using every chance she had to talk about what a horrible mother Landon was and how, she, Leticia, did everything for the children and that Landon did nothing. It was at best tasteless and tacky, and at worst, it really drew suspicion even more on herself. Why was she so adamant about putting the focus over here? There was no point when Landon was ever suspected in Gannon going missing. So, throwing all of this shade over there really had people raising an eyebrow towards Leticia. Now, it was no secret that Landon had had some prior issues, and that's really the reason that the children were living in the full-time care of their father. But you know what? So what? The children were with their biological father. They were not in state custody. The children were with their natural parent. And I would hope that should I ever find myself in a situation where I am struggling with life things, that I would be able to count on my children's father, if we are together, but if we were separated. And I would hope and would really probably assume that should he take another wife, that I would be able to trust this person with my child or my children. So, let's give Landon a break, and she has a tremendous amount of support online and, in her community. So that's at least refreshing to hear. Also, Leticia at that time did this bizarro interview where, I mean, she might as well have had narcissist just written all over her face. At no point was she talking about Gannon, who was still missing at that point. It was all about her and how people were being mean to her online. And, she couldn't wait till they all found out, how wrong they were and that they would owe her an apology. And she said this over and over and over. It was crazy. So, a lot of people were starting to focus on her because, her behavior at the time that he was missing was just, wacky. And her stories continued to evolve and they were ever changing. I mean, we went from the point that Gannon went to a friend's house and just hadn't returned all the way to she had, okay, because we're going to talk about the candle in a second, but there had been an accident with a candle that had caused a burn mark in the rug. And she at one point told a story that somebody was coming to repair the rug, but when he arrived, after she gave him entry into the home by giving him the code to the garage, he then raped her, like continuously. And then he stole Gannon. He kidnapped Gannon. That eventually ended up changing. I mean, it kind of stayed the same, but it changed from this unknown person to her actually taking the photo of somebody who had a sketchy past online in her community and then saying it was him and that she was driving home that day after her errands and saw him laying in the road because I guess he laid there as a way to stop her car, forcing her to have to stop. And then he got in the car and forced her to take him to her house where he then not only, raped her and kidnapped Gannon, but also forced her to give him a suitcase and an empty cardboard box. It was crazy. But all of these things had a purpose because when poor little Gannon was found, he was found in a suitcase, and likely she figured that suitcase would come up missing, which is why she wanted to, put it in the possession of this attacker and kidnapper. He was found, so they lived in Colorado. He was eventually found almost 2 months later after he was reported missing, all the way in Pensacola, Florida, in a suitcase under a bridge, and sadly, and of course, deceased. So she actually had already been arrested I want to say she was arrested, if memory serves me right, March 2nd maybe, and he was found around March 20th. She had already been arrested even though they didn't have a body. So we know that they were, finding a lot of evidence. They had found blood splatter. They had found, signs of a very violent altercation in the home. And her alibi that she was out running errands was confirmed. She was at a Petco twice that day. But Gannon was not in the store with her. So he was seen leaving the house on one of those Ring doorbells. But in that video, you could tell he was not well. Like he had already sustained some kind of injury. He was kind of walking a little odd, very slow. And there's no confirmation of him returning with her after those errands. Now, the affidavit says that the police believe that the actual murder took place in the home. But some people don't necessarily believe that. I am one that actually doesn't believe that. I think the child was battered and hurt very badly in the home the night before he was reported missing. I don't think the actual murder took place there. And if it, I don't think that it did, because I don't think he returned home with her that day. And the police seem to believe he did. I'm not sure, what they have to believe that, because I don't believe that there was any sign of him on any of the neighbors, Ring doorbells or anything. coming back in the house, but we'll find out in trial. I personally am not convinced that he returned home with her that day, which would mean if we saw him leave, that the murder had to take place somewhere else. But I think he was pretty close to done. And I don't mean to say it so callously, but the night before, there was an incident, which I'm sure all of you are aware of, with the candle. You know, he knocks over the candle, it burns the rug, she has a meltdown. There's that little bit of video that she is like berating him about the candle, that actually she released this video. I don't know how that was supposed to help her, because it actually made her look like a lunatic. But, you know, she's going on and on and on. I get being really upset if the kid knocked over a candle and it burnt the rug. I get it. But she was acting really loony in this video. And I think that the candle was the straw that broke the camel's back. There had been a lot of Google searches prior to this candle night where Leticia was Googling so many things like how to find a husband without children, what to do when you feel like you're just a glorified babysitter, you know, when a biological mother does nothing for the children and you have to do everything. What to do if your husband chooses his family over you. It was a lot. I mean, endless Google searches that showed a woman who was clearly unhappy in her role as a stepmother. Now, Leticia is not a first-time mom here, okay? She has a daughter of her own who is 17 years old, Haley. This isn't her first rodeo, but having these children that were not biologically hers, and because of Dad's career, were left in her care frequently for her to be, you know, 100% the caretaker with no help, seemed to be something that she resented. And it seems from these searches that this resentment was building. When you couple that with the fact that, according to Leticia, she suffers from bipolar disorder that was not being treated at the time, that could be a very bad combination. You have a woman who has a potentially chemical imbalance that is not being regulated, who already likely has very severe and serious mood swings, and is now feeling this smothering sense of resentment towards these helpless children in her care that are not even biologically hers. So she doesn't even have, from what we can tell, you know, a real true bond with them. This is not a good combination, folks. Now, it gets really sad when you find out that it looks like, allegedly, that she may have dragged her own 17-year-old daughter into the situation to help her cover up this crime, because Haley was with her in Pensacola when they allegedly would have disposed of Gannon's body, because we know that they together stayed at a motel only a few miles away from where Gannon would be found, and, you know, in a rented car. So it looks like they were trying to cover their tracks. What is the culpability of Haley if this comes out in trial, that she did in fact help her mother dispose of her stepbrother's body? She's 17 years old, clearly old enough to know right from wrong, but we don't know what the relationship dynamic was between Haley and her mother. If Leticia has been unbalanced, as, you know, we clearly see her now, and as she says herself she is, what was growing up like with her? Because Leticia's first husband died of It looks like some kind of overdose. So, she probably was not in a very good state of mind, at least for some duration of time, when Haley was young. We don't know what that relationship was like and what Haley went through. So, does she get a pass if she had, you know, this very controlling, narcissistic, mentally unbalanced mother who, you know, kind of dragged her into this? It's hard to say. Now, Haley seems like she's doing very well now. She seems very positive in her social media videos, and she's a very beautiful girl. It's going to be interesting to hear her talk at the trial because she is on the witness list, as is Gannon's little sister. So we're going to get some serious insight into what life was like living with Leticia, especially when Dad was away. Now, her original thought going into all of this after she was arrested was that she was going to represent herself at the trial. But because that was then followed by her writing some really weird letters to the judge and constantly talking about how she was struggling mentally and, just, I don't know if it was for show or not, but, she really put on quite an elaborate display at her preliminary hearing, kind of going around, bouncing around, swaying, acting like she wasn't very coherent. Now, according to her, she had the diagnosis of bipolar, and none of that behavior is associated with bipolar disorder. So I don't know if she has other stuff going on. I don't know if she was faking it. I don't know. But at any rate, she was appointed a defense attorney because there's just no way they're going to let her represent herself so that then later that can be reason for, a mistrial if she was allowed to represent herself and she clearly was struggling mentally. We're waiting for reports to come back, and they should be back the end of this month because this whole thing about her competency continues to drag on. She's had like more evaluations than I can count. At this point, she will likely plead not guilty by reason of insanity. And I have really mixed feelings about that as a defense, just in general. Look, obviously there's something wrong with you if you killed your 11-year-old stepson, clearly. But the actual defense of not guilty by reason of insanity does not mean that you just suffer from a mental illness. Because let's face it, thousands upon thousands of people suffer from some kind of mental illness or have a psychiatric diagnosis of some sort. And they still are held accountable to follow the law and specifically not to murder children. So we cannot say, okay, well, she's bipolar, she's this or she's that, and that in and of itself is going to be a diagnosis, because there are endless people out there with the same diagnosis that are living, very functional lives and would never in a million years do something like this. But it has to be at least taken into account, right? Because if she was untreated, and bipolar is like a spectrum. So if she had a very severe, case, if she was way over here on the spectrum and she had rage and losses of control at times, that obviously is significant. And I put no blame on the father whatsoever. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. But, just in general, if you have somebody living with you, a spouse or, somebody who has this type of diagnosis and they are not being medicated, you really need to be watching their behavior, and you have to really take this into account. What are their mood swings like? Are they manic and happy and then, just kind of sullen and sad? Is it, how are their fluctuations? Do they go into rages and just get really irritable and angry over really small things? And if they do, even periodically, is it safe to leave small children in their care? This is something that would be very individual for each person. And I don't know if Gannon's dad was even aware of the diagnosis, or if he, witnessed this kind of behavior, if he obviously didn't have any concerns about her because he was gone a lot and she was with the children. And I will say this, it doesn't seem like there was any concerns raised by anybody prior to this in terms of, Leticia being with Gannon and his younger sister. It doesn't look like the school ever, reached out to authorities or had any kind of concerns, or that the children had made any kind of, accusations against her to any mandated reporters. It doesn't look like there was any history like that. So I don't know. And I don't even know that she has this diagnosis. I mean, she could just be making that up. But she has been evaluated several times to see what her competency level is going forward. The duration of this trial is likely to be about 6 weeks, making jury selection very difficult. They went through like 75 people yesterday. They're still at it today. It is very hard to seat a jury that can ride out a trial this big that could go on for like 6 weeks. Some people just can't leave their job for that long, depending on what their responsibilities are at that job. Now, a job cannot, fire you. This is, your obligation to go to jury duty. So they do have to make it work if you're called. And most jobs pay you, but not the amount that you would necessarily get at work. And that is just not feasible for some people. Maybe they don't have the time, they don't have the money to cover it. And childcare can certainly be a horrific obstacle for 6 weeks. If you have children that are not school age and you're home with them, who's going to take care of your kids for 6 weeks? And even if they're in school, if you're the one that picks them up or takes them to school, or, you're home with them before and after school, depending on what your job hours are, maybe you just financially can't make it work, even with your spouse, to now have to put them in morning care, aftercare, get a babysitter, do whatever. You may have animals that, you can't financially find somebody to take care of for that amount of time. There's just a lot of reasons why a trial this big, that's going to go on for this long, could make it really hard to find a jury. Now, when you add that it is such a public case and a lot of people already have a a pre a pre like a decision in their head if they think that she's guilty or not. They may already have made up their minds. And to be on this jury, you have to say that you can be unbiased, that you can at least give her the benefit of the doubt and assume that she's innocent until the state proves her guilty. Some people are just not going to be able to do that, and especially when it comes to a case involving a child. And then, of course, aside from whether or not you think she's guilty or innocent, and never mind the fact that it can go on for 6 weeks, this trial is going to be highly publicized. I would imagine for some people, they would raise their hand wildly and they'd want to be on that jury so fast. But for some people, it give them a lot of anxiety. They might not want to be a part of something, this big and this public. And if that is going to give them feelings of, anxiety, they're going to have to be honest with that, and that's going to get them booted off the jury as it is. Most of us are dying for this trial to start, and I've heard so many different things about whether or not it's going to be streamed live. I heard the judge said absolutely not. Then I heard audio only. Then I heard, yes, it's going to be streamed, but it's going to be done with the devices that they have there in the court, and that the media is not going to be able to bring in their own devices to stream it. So, not sure like what the quality would be or how much we'll actually see her, the defendant. I I don't know. I am hoping that it is streamed live because, we've heard the horrific affidavit. We've watched Leticia, play out like a soap opera on social media, and on television. But I have a feeling we're going to hear so much in terms of the evidence that we still do not know. The affidavit that was leaked said that little Gannon was stabbed, shot, and beat. I cannot imagine at what level your rage has to be at for such an overkill. It seems like there's no way that this was over a damn candle. So, I mean, that may have sparked her anger initially, but it seems like little Gannon really took the blunt of all of the resentment and anger that she had been holding back and that was building, both for her role as a stepmother, her feelings towards their biological mother, and the feelings that she had towards her own husband, which, she stated in those Google searches was that she felt like the only thing he saw her as was a glorified babysitter. And she was looking at what it would cost to move. She was trying to find out how she could find a new husband. I mean, this woman wanted out. She was emotionally and mentally checked out of the situation. She wanted nothing more to do with it. And yet, while feeling like this, she's still the caregiver for these two children. And I don't think that it took much to light that match and ignite, her hellish fury. And I think that's exactly what happened when little Gannon knocked over that candle and ruined the rug. I think it was just the catalyst for what was brewing. And I'll tell you, so I can get being like annoyed, even maybe overreacting, but I mean, this set her into a realm that most of us will never be in, thank God, in our entire life. I remember Super Bowl, like not this last Super Bowl, the one before it. On this little, it's like a fireplace, but like a mock fireplace. I had a wax warmer on top of it, and everybody was like milling around and getting food and doing all the things. And one of my older kids kind of backed up into that little fireplace heater thing to let somebody else walk by. And when they did, and they bounced into the wax warmer, the wax like flew, like literally projectiled all up onto the yellow wall behind it. And then, like, of course, dripped down like crazy and hardened like instantly. I could not, I mean, it was like a huge spot. I could not get it off for the life of me. I tried like chiseling at it. I tried everything. I ultimately had to like sand it down and just like paint over that area. But I mean, I remember when it happened because I already knew what wax was going to be like to try to remove, almost not removable. I can remember like feeling that like instant irrational feeling of being like super annoyed, even though obviously the kid didn't like throw his body onto it on purpose. It was completely an accident. And like I didn't say anything to him at the time, thankfully, because it really was just an accident and that would have been overreacting and it would have been irrational of me. But like internally, I was feeling it. But for her, what should have been just being really annoyed or maybe even angry, depending on how the candle got knocked over. Was he doing something he shouldn't have been doing? Was he being like super irresponsible? Like, I don't know. But for any normal person, the worst case scenario is maybe you lash out and, you yell at the poor kid in a way that's like too much for the situation. And then afterwards you're like, oh God, like I need to cool off. I need to calm down. Like I'm over the top right now. I'm at a 10. For her, this moment that we've all been in, right? Of just feeling just annoyed at a kid for something, turned into homicidal rage. So I have a feeling that there's so much more to the story that we're going to learn, so much more to her as a person. And we're going to hear it from a lot of witnesses. Like I said, the kids are on the witness list. I can't even imagine who all else is going to be called, but I cannot wait. I know that you can't either. If she's going with the insanity defense, I think it's a big mistake, because to be found not guilty by reason of insanity doesn't mean you have a mental illness if that's what she's banking on. It's going to mean that at the moment that you committed this crime, you absolutely were so psychotic that you did not know that your actions were wrong. She did way too much lying and covering up and dragged, potentially, Haley even, to help her do it. I mean, she had Haley go to the dollar store and like buy all these cleaning products and everything within that time frame that police believe that he was killed. You cleaned it all up. You lied about it when they found blood traces everywhere. You said everything from he cut his foot in the garage to, all kinds of that he was all boiled up and bleeding because he got burnt on the candle. I mean, you said all kinds of things about where the blood came from. You lied, you covered it up, you cleaned it up, you disposed of the body in a horrible way, in a suitcase, and you drove far away to dispose of it there. You came up with a story about where he was and why he was missing. You came up with more stories to cover more with, the rape and the kidnapping and all of that when your first story was falling apart. For somebody who to claim that they were so psychotic that they didn't know what they did was wrong, that's a lot of planning, that's a lot of lying, that's a lot of small details that she took care of, including renting cars and everything else, to not use her own vehicle, taking her car to the car wash. I mean, all of these things do not suggest to me that you were in such a crazy state of mind at that moment that you did not know that what you did was wrong. Her efforts to cover her tracks started immediately. So it's not like a period of time went by and now you became sane and then went, into cleanup mode and cover up mode. It started right away. So, kind of tells us that you had your wits about you to some degree. That's going to be a tough defense. It's going to be a really tough defense. So tell me your thoughts on it. Tell me your thoughts on the trial starting. Are you planning on watching it? Tell me what you think about her guilt or innocence. I think that's a no-brainer. And tell me what you think about potentially her using that defense. And tell me what you think about the 17-year-old daughter. Do you think she is going to come up in testimony as being involved in the cover-up? And if yes, what do you think her culpability is? Let me know all your thoughts, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.